Before I could dare to utter a word, he sent a resounding slap across my face which sent me flying and landing painfully on my butt. While I groaned in pain, the man continued yelling at me, raining all sorts of insults on me. I managed to pull myself up. "But sir..." "Oh, you still have the guts to speak." I turned to Caitlin, yelling as the man effortlessly yanked me off the floor and began walking to a door. "Help me! Help me!" I screamed, but both women simply stood and watched him take me away. It happened so fast. Before I could do anything, he threw me off the balcony of the second floor of their mansion. I fell on my butt again, and the back of my head hit the wall. I met Caitlin 7 months ago at a mall. She was there making some purchases, but when she went to pay, she couldn't find her card. I felt sorry for her and decided to step in, and I helped her. She was so grateful that we exchanged contact information and became friends. 3 months later, I asked her to be my girlfriend, and we've dating ever since. Now, I'm in my early 30s, and Caitlin would be 30 in a few months. So I was ready to settle down with someone, and Caitlin honestly seemed like the perfect woman for me. We were out on a date at a restaurant one day when I asked if she could introduce me to her parents. Caitlin was surprised. According to her, it seemed too early since we'd only been dating for 3 months. I wanted to drop the issue, but I also wanted her family to know me before I proceeded with any plans. The only thing I could do was try to convince her more without giving away the fact that I wanted to know them before I proposed to her. Eventually, she agreed, and we set a date for the meeting. Was I nervous? A little. I mean, it's normal to be. On the day I was to see them, I made sure that I looked my best. I had a great haircut and dressed handsomely. I also rented a car, as it didn't feel nice to go in a taxi. Caitlin had already sent the address to me, so I drove over to the place. I was shocked to see her family's mansion. I called my girlfriend to inform her about my arrival, and she came out smiling and led me in. My jaw dropped as we walked into the mansion. The house was incredibly opulent. I had no idea that her family was so wealthy, and I tried my best not to show it as I was ushered into the living room where 2 people sat. I knew by just seeing her face that the woman was her mother. The resemblance was insane. I guessed the man to be her father, but I was wrong.
"This is my mom and my uncle. Y'all, meet Jay, my boyfriend."
Her mother was welcoming. She stood up and embraced me, asking various questions about me, but her uncle continuously glared at me from where he sat, without a word. After exchanging pleasantries with her mother, Caitlin pulled me toward her uncle.
"Uncle Sam, meet my boyfriend. He's been dying to see you both."
The words that came out of his mouth next shocked me beyond belief. "Well, you could have let him die. How could you think of dating a black man, Caitlin?" I cleared my throat. I'd encountered quite a handful of racists, so I thought I knew just how to handle him. I flashed him a smile and said, "I'm black, but I'm a good man, Uncle. I'll be good to Kate." That sentence seemed to spark a feeling of anger inside of him. He stood up, his incredible height making him tower above me. Right in my face, he barked, "You are black! You are bad! Bad men can't date my niece!" Before I could dare to utter a word, he sent a resounding slap across my face which sent me flying and landing painfully on my butt. While I groaned in pain, the man continued yelling at me, raining all sorts of insults on me. I managed to pull myself up. "But sir..." "Oh, you still have the guts to speak." I turned to Caitlin, yelling as the man effortlessly yanked me off the floor and began walking to a door. "Help me! Help me!" I screamed, but both women simply stood and watched him take me away. It happened so fast. Before I could do anything, he threw me off the balcony of the second floor of their mansion. I fell on my butt again, and the back of my head hit the wall. I remained at the spot, in deep pain, my nose and head bleeding. Caitlin rushed out to see if I was hurt.
"Come back into the house with me. He'll be convinced about your love for me if you do."
I couldn't believe my ears. She wasn't even apologizing. "Caitlin, I was almost killed by your uncle just now," I reminded her, but she was more concerned about me going back into the house. I pushed her hands off me and managed to pull myself up. She watched as I staggered out of the compound and got into my rented car. I stuffed tissues in my nostrils to absorb the blood while I managed to drive back home. I honestly had no idea how I was able to do that without crashing into other cars. My vision was blurry, and I thought I'd faint at any moment, but I didn't. Once I got home, I collapsed tiredly on the floor. The next day, after I'd treated my wounds, I got a call from Caitlin.
Will you be coming today, honey? My uncle is waiting.
I was pissed off. How could she dare to ask me to come back after what that man had done to me? That bastard almost killed me, and you want me to go back there?
Don't be a weakling, honey. My uncle simply wanted to test your strength. I feel sad already that you didn't pass his test.
I was dumbfounded. How could she be defending her uncle's behavior? For a second, I thought I had heard her incorrectly, only to have her confirm that she was. She also said she'd want me to come take the test again so her uncle would be convinced that I was real with her. That made me even more shocked. Do you know what your uncle has done to me? My head is broken. Same with my nose. My whole body hurts, and you want me to come back?
Come on, don't be such a weakling. My uncle could harm you, but he'll never kill you. It's just a test.
It was the first time I was seeing how red the flag was. In that moment, I was so thankful that I'd gone to see her family early on in the relationship. It would have been worse if I'd waited until we were already engaged or had been dating for a long time. I can't do this with you anymore, Kate. I'm breaking up with you, I told her. She pretended to not hear, so I repeated my words, which angered her greatly. She hurled all manner of insults at me and repeatedly called me a shameless weakling. I was done listening to her, and so I hung up. Caitlin tried reaching me throughout the day, but I didn't pick up her calls or even reply to her texts, which were filled with curses. The pain in my head increased with each passing day. After a week, it felt like my head was going to explode, and I was forced to visit a hospital. There, the doctor informed me that I was injured internally. He told me that the injury was so severe that I could have died if I had waited any longer to seek help. He told me that I would need emergency surgery immediately. I excused myself to call Caitlin. Can I speak to your uncle? Put it on loudspeaker. She was excited, thinking I finally wanted to settle things. After a minute, I heard her uncle's voice. Hey, weakling. I ignored his words and went straight to telling him that I was going to have surgery, and since he was the one that had caused my wounds, that he needed to cover the costs. I won't give you any money, you weak man. Die if you want.
I can't believe you'd stoop so low as to request money from my uncle.
I expected such reactions from them, but I had no choice. And so I went ahead with my surgery, making sure to document everything with my camera. I was at the hospital for 2 weeks, during which I arranged to meet with a lawyer, and I explained everything to them, including my plans to press charges against Kate's uncle and to have him arrested. Once I'd fully recovered, the hospital discharged me, and 3 days later, I went to Caitlin's house with some policemen. Her uncle made a huge fuss and swore and threatened them, but in the end, they took him away. A month later, we were summoned to appear in court for his hearing. I showed all the evidence I had gathered and gave my testimony on what he had done to me. The case was adjourned, but her uncle remained in detention. Caitlin met me outside the courtroom.
How dare you do this to my uncle? Withdraw your charges and apologize to my Uncle Sam, or you'll regret this.
You should be the one worrying about that. I will not withdraw my charges.
Ugh, I hate you so much. I hope you get hit by a car and die.
I ignored her and walked away, my determination to put her uncle behind bars undeterred. We returned to court a week later, and he was asked to serve a year in prison for harming an innocent individual and to pay up all the money I spent at the hospital, which was a lot. He did end up paying, and I was extremely grateful, as I wouldn't have been able to afford to pay those medical bills on my own. Caitlin's uncle was a wealthy man, and also the one taking care of them, and while he was in prison, Caitlin and her mother were forced to dip into his fortune. They were unemployed and didn't have any experience working, and he had given them access to his finances. By the time he got out, he discovered that the two of them had spent all of his money and had amassed huge debts in his name. They had no concept of financial responsibility and left him ruined. Unfortunately, he had lost his job due to being in prison, so he no longer had a way to make any money and try to dig himself out of the mess that they had put him in. Also, their neighbors knew about what he had done, so they spread the news around, and somehow, it managed to get to the ears of his employers. That added to the reason they refused to take him back. It was bad enough that their employee was a convict, but for them to be associated with a racist man looked bad for their company. Since they barely had any money, he was forced to sell their mansion so he could pay off their debt and use the rest to rent a small apartment for them. The stress from losing his job and mansion was too much for him to take, and he began drinking heavily to escape from reality. Unfortunately, he was a very mean drunk, and he began to take out his frustrations on Kate and her mother. It didn't take much for them to anger him, and he became physically and verbally abusive. One day, he got so violent that he broke Kate's mother's leg bad enough that she would never be able to walk without the aid of a walker again. After that, they realized that they couldn't take it anymore and chose to run away, leaving him all alone, jobless, and frustrated. Caitlin and her mother came to my house to beg for my forgiveness, but I released my dogs and had them chase them out. Recently, I heard her uncle committed suicide, and Caitlin now works as a cleaner at a mall to take care of her now crippled mother. Even though it was quite petty, I decided to visit the mall, and I intentionally dropped a bottle of wine on the ground. Seconds later, Caitlin showed up to clean up the mess. Her face was filled with embarrassment as she stared at me. With a mocking laugh, I threw some dollar notes on the floor for the broken bottle, brushed her off, and walked out of the mall, my heart filled with happiness.